We all know Jim Steranko as one of the premier artists of the Marvel Age of Comics. He was considered by many to be the seminal artist for Nick Fury, Agent of Steel, during his run in Strange Tales during the 1960s. But more on that in a future video. Did you know that Steranko published a history of comics in the 1970s? If you want to know more about Steranko the historian, stay tuned. Hi comic guys and gals, I'm Joe and welcome to Anachronic Comics. Jim Steranko is well known in the comic book world primarily through his work at Marvel Comics. At one time, he was considered one of the top 3 Marvel artists, being paid at the level of both Jack Kirby and John Buscema. He loved to draw sexy women as well. If you're watching the Marvel Disney Plus series and were wondering who created Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, yep, it was Steranko in Strange Tales number 159. In 1969, Steranko began his own publishing company, Super Graphics, and in 1970 he conceived and planned out a 6-issue history of comics to be published by the company. The first issue was published in 1970 and the second in 1972. None of the other planned issues were ever published. Now, I was fortunate to buy the first when it came out in 1970. I also have the second, a larger issue, that I bought off eBay a number of years after it was published. As you can see, both are tabloid-sized books. Steranko included hundreds of black and white cover reproductions, as well as a complete reprint of one of the Spirit stories by Will Eisner in Volume 2. There are interviews with numerous creators from the 1930s and the 1940s, comics' golden age. So I struggled on how to show you the wonderful information in these books, but each time I pulled out a quote or two, there was just so much more I wanted to say. There was just no way to adequately relay the substance of this book in a YouTube video. There's just too much of it. You would need a mini-series. So I settled on us looking through the books together. In this video, let's take a look at Volume 1. So Volume 1 covered 8 subjects. Let's open it up. Well, first of all, let's look at the cover. So here you have a wonderful Steranko wraparound cover. Let's see if I can do it some justice anyway. Where he's got a bunch of heroes from the Golden Age all the way through the Silver Age. Remember, this publication was in 1970. Now you notice that here there's a sticker, which I've kept on there, that said that I bought this for $3, which was a nice sum of money back in 1970 for someone like me. But interestingly, I've seen some online where it said right over here, and I'm not sure that I've got the same thing, it indicated that the price was $4. So I'm not sure if I got it for a better price or if that $4 one might have been a second printing. In any event, let's take a look. All right, so there were 8 parts to this, as I mentioned, and as we go along, when we open it up, the first thing we see is a title page, the Steranko History of Comics. And you see there's a lot of foxing on this from the old days there, even along the edge over here. Unfortunately, it wasn't kept as well as it's kept now. So just have to deal with that. As we go into the next page, we see that there is a dedication. Let me bring it a little closer. All right. Dedicated to Jack Kirby, without whom there may not have been any comics to write a history about. Very cool. All right, let's fill this back up over here. All right. And right here we have a nice Alex Raymond Flash Gordon drawing. But very interestingly, the foreword was written by one of the great movie directors of all time, Federico Fellini. And basically what he does, he talks about his experience in reading and essentially loving comics in Italy as a boy, and what it meant for him in terms of his development as a really a superior movie director. As we go on to number one, or part one, part one is called The Coming Attractions. The first part relates to the origins of storylines in newspaper strips as kind of being the precursor to our comic books. Now you might recall that Superman was first conceived by Siegel and Schuster as a newspaper strip because that's how artists and writers made their money in those days. If we take a look at this, we see some great Harold Foster Prince Valiant drawings here. And on this bottom part here, we have a number of different comic strips. We have Dick Tracy, we have the Phantom, Buck Rogers, and Red Ryder, to name a few of them that are here. Interestingly, a lot of what I see here, these comic strips, were comic strips as I was growing up in the newspapers. They were still publishing them in those days. I'm not sure what's being published now, to be honest with you, because I don't usually buy newspapers anymore. I get most of my news from either cable or from the internet. Now here again, we have some great Alex Raymond drawings. So good. Just look at this. So good. Any event, as we go on, if you read through this, and you can see how with all these words here, it's just difficult to pick out things to talk about. But in this first part, we just see that there were a number of different strips that made the comic books possible. The very first strip was Tarzan that had any kind of notoriety in any event. There were others like Prince Valiant, Flash Gordon that came into play. And Flash Gordon really came into play as a competitor to Buck Rogers, who predated him. Here are a few more. Here's like Terry and the Pirates from 1936. Milton Caniff was the one who did Steve Canyon. Again, another one that I read when I was a kid that was there. So you see that as he goes through it, he talks about Mandrake the Magician. An important one, his Tarzan. Tarzan was perhaps the most successful of the comic strips when they came out. So he was really the one that got everything going. And after that, you start to see a bunch of others coming in, including Mandrake the Magician, the Phantom, etc. And at the end, here, at the end of this first section or first part, he says, comic heroes were outweighed, outnumbered, and outclassed by the newspaper characters that spawned them. The papers had humor strips by the hundreds. Perhaps adventure stories were better suited to the comics. But even newspaper heroes were variations of another form. Didn't Tarzan begin as a novel? And Buck Rogers? And wasn't Tracy, that's Dick Tracy, inspired by the fictional detectives? It would be foolish to imitate an imitation, so why not go back to the source? What comics needed was a startling new approach, a bold and sensational direction to thrust them into the realm of popular success. Why not go back to the source? Perhaps the answer could be found there. And that source was the pulps. So next part is called The Bloody Pulps, and he talks about the influence of the pulp magazines on comic books. And this is really nice with the white on black, kind of gives it that aura of suspense that's there. And here, as you might imagine, is the Shadow. He was basically the very first super successful pulp hero. And we all know about him. He saw me take out some DC Shadow comic books when I was showing my mailers. That was a 12-copy run, if I remember correctly, 12-issue run, which I have all of them now. So the Shadow was really big. And if you take a look at it, very interestingly, we talk about Batman's rogue gallery and Spider-Man's rogue gallery, but listen to this rogue gallery that he has. And again, he was basically like a crime fighter. So it says here he had the Black Master, Green Eyes, Mox, Zero, the Blue Sphinx, the Condor, the Gray Fist, the Creeper, the Python, the Voodoo Master, Kenzal, the Masked Headsman, the Crimson Phoenix, the Hand, the Silver Skull, the Vindicator, that's Harlequin, Q, the Wasp, the Green Terror, the Blur, the Wizard of Crime, the Voice, Robot Master, the Mask, and Mac Mordo, and countless others. So he had a tremendous rogues gallery of his own. Then we move from the Shadow to the Man of Bronze, Doc Savage. Now, Doc Savage's stories were a bit different, and I know because I read some of these pulps when they were republished as paperbacks back in the 60s. And he basically fought more against, kind of like the madmen that wanted to take over the world, and he had a bunch of friends that helped him out with this. So he was called the Man of Bronze, and as you can see, he was the original Superman. All right, Doc Savage, man of master mind and body. Follow his glorious adventures every month in the Doc Savage 10 Cents magazine at all newsstands. All right, so I won't bother reading through the description here for you, but his friends include a brigadier general, Ham, but he was very strong. There was an engineer named Remy. There were Little John, I think, was kind of the brain. So he had a lot of different people that would help him. And I think he began in 1933, if I remember correctly. Going on, we have the Spider, the Black Detective, Captain Satan. All right, very, very interesting with respect to this. And then as we continue, I want to bring your attention to this guy here. All right, this guy is the Black Bat. And what's interesting about him when you read through this is that the Black Bat was a nocturnal nemesis of evil. He really was the precursor to Batman and Detective Comics. His description, he actually was a combination, I would say, of what we have today. We have Batman and Daredevil, because originally he became blind when acid was thrown in his face, and he had to then practice to get all his other senses in tuned, so he fought crime while being blind. He later got some kind of ocular transplant so that he can see, but he had special eyesight. He could make himself look like he was blind and whatever else, which I guess helped with his secret identity. So, just really some cool stuff. The Avenger was another one that came into play. Here you see some Wu Fang, Yang Tsin. So the Asian influence was very mysterious, and so there were a lot of pulp magazines about that. Detective ones, Weird Tales, all really cool stuff. Here's detective fiction, The Black Mask, Public Enemy. And then we kind of move over and we move into what I guess you would call to be the future. Captain Future was one that came out of these pulps. But one I did want to focus in on is right here. It talks about E.E. Smith, PhD, and he wrote what at least Steranko called the ultimate science fiction adventure, a 6-part, 600,000-word Lensman saga. This and his Skylark series in 1928 set the pace for all cosmic thrillers yet to come. I read both of those again as a boy back in the 1960s because they were republished in paperbacks. And I believe I still have those paperbacks down in the basement. I'll go looking for them, and if I could find the paperbacks, I'll do a video on all the paperbacks I have. Maybe some Doc Savage. I think I might have some Tarzan. I think I might have John Carter, Warrior Mars. This was my introduction to the pulps, and I was just reading through these stories, which were terrific. And when they moved over into comic books, I did collect some of the comic books as well. Let's see what else. And here we go, Amazing Stories. Look at that. Isn't that great? All right, some more covers there. Wonder Magazine, Startling Stories. I think Analog Science Fiction, Science Fact, And Amazing Stories were two that, at least when I was a boy, were still being sold at the newsstand, that I would pick up now and then to read the stories. So at the end, what he does say is the pulp heroes had maintained a vast secret society for preserving law and order. Now their day was over, but the country still needed a good 10-cent hero. The comic industry was officially about to be born. So what comes next? Well, part 3 is called The Superstar. I think you can imagine who or what that is. Yep, Superman. Here you have a Schuster outline of a Superman cover. And here, this is pretty cool, The Superstar. You have 4 pages from an unpublished Superman story circa 1939. And on the right side here, you have those iconic covers of Action Comics #1 and Superman #1. And it goes through a story of, Jerry Siegel and thinking about it, going over to his friend Schuster, and, coming up and basically the two young 17-year-olds developing Superman. Here's the iconic story of him coming to Earth. And here you have a number of great covers and a discussion about, potentially how Superman came to be. One thing that they do mention is that the idea may have come, at least in part, from Doc Savage, the man of bronze, not of steel, and also the ad that called him a Superman. Okay. Now here we have a panel breakdown of 2 pages of an early Superman story by Joe Shuster. Shuster was really good at the way, he says here, the way he set up, his characters and his illustrations. Here we have a few more covers. This is one that I really like. Right? This is the one I've shown before, I think, on my patriotic heroes of the 40s, of the Golden Age. Another great one, busting out. So, Breaking the Chains, the one that Neil Adams repeated on his Superman cover. Just some great stuff. Here's a war one where he has Germany and Japan represented. Oh, one thing here, this is kind of an interesting story that I know about. Basically, on Miami Beach, Schuster was arrested for loitering. So what he did was he tried to show the person that he wasn't the policeman, that he wasn't just a bum hanging out. So he took out a load of money that he had, and he said, well, I'm one of the creators of Superman. So of course they didn't believe him. They brought him over into the courthouse, and one of the people in court says, well, if you're really Schuster, who co-created and drew Superman, then draw him for us now. So he did. He drew something for them. They believed him, and basically they let him go. So that was kind of an interesting little tidbit that was there. Then they get into the fact that, Superman started to become a little bit silly, with the cutting of the hair, getting Toyman, getting hit in the head here, while juggling, hurting his foot, and that he went through this whole kind of silly period for a while. And part of it was basically the writers that took over and who they were with respect to that, until they started to get some better writers and other artists in to take over Superman later in the 1940s. And then with the serial that came out of Superman in 1948, and the other one, Superman versus the Atom Man, and then the George Reeves movie, which was the pilot for the TV show Superman and the Mole Men, that really helped to push Superman more into the mainstream, and better writers wanted to get involved with him at that point in time. So basically he says that Superman really was the character that held everything together because of his notoriety and what people really kind of looked up to him. They call him the Big Blue Boy Scout and that type of stuff. Apparently that was really what stuck during the 1950s, and during the downturn of comics at that time, it was Superman, with some help from Batman, I guess, that really, kept the industry going. The next part is called the Playboy hero. Can you guess who that is? Yep, there he is. Batman, the Playboy hero. And again, here we have the iconic Detective Comics cover. And again, when he goes through this, he basically explains a bit about Bill Finger's involvement with Batman. And if his history is to be believed, the idea was Bob Kane's, but he went over and got the assist from Bill Finger, who then came up and helped really come up with all these different type of characters that were there, and actually had a lot to do with the way Batman looked, because apparently Bob Kane's original Batman looked almost like a guy in tights, like a Superman, but he had a bat cape. Think back to that other chapter, we had the Bat, all right, who basically was dressed in some ways. So you can see that that Bat from the 1930s did have some influence, at least on Bob Kane's idea of Batman. Some more great covers here. They talk a little bit about, I think it was over here, wasn't it? Yeah, they talk about the Black Bat here, which we already spoke about. And Brian Stoker's stories about Dracula and how that might have played a part in it as well. Great drawing here of the Joker. I think this might have been by Jerry Robinson, actually. Yeah, this was Jerry Robinson. And I think this where, yeah, Robinson's sketch of Wayne and Grayson. And below, the Robinson Joker, which we all know. Again, some more covers over here. Really terrific. One of the iconic covers is Batman reading Batman. Okay. All right. So, and again, the Joker, I think if you read this, the Joker was basically just taken from the playing card that was there. Another iconic cover here. Two-Face in here. The Penguin in a cage. Excellent. During some of this time, started battling monsters and stuff and robots just like anybody else. But then what happened was they kind of just changed it and got back to some of the more criminal-minded type of situations that they were involved in. But during the 1950s especially, it was not a good time, again, for most comic books. And as I mentioned before, Superman basically was the one that was keeping them in play. And going into the 60s, Superman was the biggest seller, not Batman. Next, the American Idol. Yep, it's Captain America, the American Idol. All right. Interestingly, what I didn't know from the origin that was here, they talk about FDR asked, "What would you suggest, gentlemen? A character out of the comic books, perhaps the Human Torch in the army would solve our problems?" And that's where Professor Reinstein offered the solution of a serum that transforms the sickly Steve Rogers into Captain America. So that looks like it was initially the idea of FDR to come up with something super, and Captain America was the answer. So here, I mean, it goes through the Pulp formula was applied to Captain America. Clearly, he was born and burst on the scene in 1941 with the iconic cover where he's hitting Hitler across the face there. I think, yes, it was April of 1941. So it kind of goes through the history. It talks about, some of the character and how he developed, what was done. Some great covers here, that you see, boom, boom. I mean, he really was the embodiment of patriotism and an idol to millions. He gave America hope, like a lot of other comic book characters that were involved, at least tangentially through their stories in the war effort. Although, of course, Captain America was number one in that respect. All right, and there he is. Jack Kirby, Captain America. What a great splash page this is of him. Fantastic. All right. Again, some more covers that are here. They talk a little bit about how he branched out to beef up sales and sex appeal They introduced Betsy Ross in issue number 66 as his new assistant, Golden Girl, because Bucky had been hurt. That didn't quite help out too much. And again, going into the late 40s, he died off as a comic book character in 1949. So just before the 1950s, and it was kind of the trend then, how a lot of those war heroes only lasted until a little bit after the war. And so as we know, Cap did come back. The next one is called Super Double Feature. And we're talking about, the Submariner and the Human Torch. So this chapter, Submariner versus the Human Torch and Other Timely Heroes, starts off with the origin of the Human Torch and how he was a humanoid. This was developed by Professor Horton, etc. But he was combustible, I guess. And he was able then to basically get a secret identity and be able to kind of control it. And that's when he became a hero. He had a costume, a blue costume, in the beginning. But then he got his own book with a young sidekick like all of them did. So here's a bunch of nice... His first appearance was in Marvel Comics, as was Submariners, which was a 64-page comic. And here's his own, some covers of his own book. Submariner went into his own book as well, but they continued in Marvel Comics for a while. Some really cool comic covers. Now, interestingly, the art here with some of these were not really that good. I think if you read, I have some reprints of those, and you take a look at the art, and it was okay, to say the least. But I think it was more the characters, and that's what Steranko talks about. It was the characters, their uniqueness, and what they brought to the table during the 1940s that really made them popular. So Marvel Comics continued having them in there, but then started to move over into other characters as well, like Khazar, the Masked Raider, Jungle Terror. Then they opened up to Daring Comics, which had only 12 issues, but had a bunch of different characters. John Steele, Texas Kid, the Bullet, the Purple Mask, Marvel Boy, the Fiery Mask, the Thunderer. So they were just coming up with all these different characters, Timely Comics, to kind of fill the bill at this particular point in time. And like other of these 1940s, a lot of them towards the end of the 40s, early 50s, just kind of burned out and no longer were printed. Here you've got Mystic Comics, Red Raven Comics, with respect to that. Very interestingly, here are a few more. Miss America is one that I spoke about in another video. All Winners Comics, The Blonde Phantom, USA, Select Comics. So, and they just kind of, these characters just had these adventures in all of these Timely Comics. So National was #1, but Timely, would, I guess in the 1960s, in 20 years, would it switch over to Marvel, would basically take on National Comics or DC. And the next one was the Best Supporting Characters. So here, again in this first issue, which covers basically the 30s and 40s, you have many of the supporting characters. Here on this page, you've got kind of a splash page with them in there. So you have Starman, Johnny Thunderbolt, the Spectre, Dr. Fate, the Sandman, Dr. Midnight, and the original Atom, and Hawkman's behind that. On this side here, you see the big All-American comic book, New York World's Fair Comics, which had Superman and Batman, along with the Sandman, and Slam Bradley in there. Really interesting. So they had a lot of different features in these books, so there were 64 pages that they had to fill out, and a lot of the stories really weren't that long. They might have been 8, 10 pages, maybe 12 pages, according to this. As we go on, there we see World's Finest Comics, all right, which I have a healthy number of, but not the real early ones like this, but some from the 60s. Flash Comics, which also figured not just the Flash, but Hawkman as well. The Old Flash Quarterly. Adventure Comics, which was still printing, and still being printed as well. And there you see Starman on that. Some more on Action Comics. Remember now, Superman in the early Action Comics wasn't the only hero that was in there. Green Lantern, all right, original Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Here we have All American Comics is Green Lantern and the Harlequin. Sensation Comics, which we know had Wonder Woman, Wonder Woman's own comic here as well. All right. Let's see, some more Wonder Woman, Comic Cavalcade. All right, some more Golden Age, it's Golden Age fun. Adventure Comics with Our Man there. Some more World's Finest. Black Canary made her appearance during this time as well. Wildcat. If you're watching the Stargirl show, you'll see them mentioned quite often as the original Justice Society of America. And I think some of them are going to make some appearances during this season as well. Okay. Some more Action Comics, fun comics. And here, this is a Jerry Robinson and Mort Meskin drawing of looks like a Western. Not sure which one this is. Let's see if he tells us here. Yeah, I don't see it. I don't see it. Maybe it's in here somewhere, but I don't know which one it is. But definitely a Western. Okay. And, oh, what's this? Oh, look at this. You realize it was in here. $6, November 8th, 1977. Oh, at the bottom line on 4th Street, I went to see Blood, Sweat, and Tears on November 8th, 1977. Oh, that's cool. I didn't even know it was in there. Okay. So then they, of course, All-Star Comics, which had the Justice Society, and there's some great covers here reproduced. Leading Comics here. The Shining Knight. Yeah, who's that cowboy? That might have been the other one that was the one on that other page. The Vigilante. So maybe that's who was on that other page that we were looking at. It might have been this one. Looks like him. Yep. So that was the Vigilante we were looking at. Leading Comics. And the last part of the book are the kid players. All right. The Young Allies. All right. Here is a Joe Simon and Jack Kirby picture of the Boy Commandos, which was reprinted. I have the reprint of that. I think it was fairly recently. I picked it up because I had heard about them beforehand. Kind of cool. The Newsboy Legion is here as well. Kirby made up a lot of these people that are here. Star Spangled Comics, featuring the Star Spangled Kid. Okay. Here you have some more. Here's the Boy Commandos that we spoke about. Some more Star Spangled Comics. And here, and this is really cool. I don't know if you could read this. Let me put this up here. But this was Simon and Kirby's letterhead in 1947 with a whole bunch of their kid players, I guess, here along the side, and some of the other characters, including the Cap, that they had developed. And that's a cool letterhead, boy. Very nice. Okay, some more. The Boy Commandos, more of the Boy Commandos. The original Daredevil magazine. The original Daredevil, a little different than today's Daredevil, I think. Boy Explorers. Speed Comics. And here's the end. The Wayne Boring Superman here. Steranko ended up by basically giving a list of all the people that helped them put it together. And they were quite a bit of them, a lot of them that you would know, including Bill Everett, Bill Finger, Gardner Fox, Bill Gaines, Chip Goodman, who else? Jack Kirby he spoke to, Joe Kubert, a whole bunch of people, Julie Schwartz in here. So Mort Weisinger as well at DC. So he goes through and explains a little bit about how he prepared it. It's kind of a cool and boring thing. Well, it does tickle. I remember that in one of the comic books, something like that. So that's it. It's the back. All right. The Steranko History of Comics, Volume 1. and that I bought back in 1970 or 71, around that time. So as you can see, with all this information, it has to be read to fully appreciate Steranko's work. A few copies of Volume 1 can still be found online. Amazon has it listed for $125, while I saw one eBay listing at $89.99. You probably can find a copy for less if you look. There are quite a few copies of Volume 2 available, and we'll take a look at that volume in an upcoming video. So that's the video. If you enjoyed it, like always, I ask you to please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share the video with your friends. Take care, and I'll see you soon.